The tradition of the Inca are filled with legends of giants. In fact, the Inca believed that many of the megalithic structures found in their lands were built by the giants. But their belief in giants was not only based on the megalithic structures, but on the bones of the giants. In the mid-16th century, 168 Spanish conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro obliterated the Incas with modern weapons of war and smallpox. The conquistadors were looking for gold, and they found it in great abundance. But what they did not expect to find were the bones of colossal giants, which they discovered all over the land. One of the most detailed accounts of giants in Peru was written by renowned conquistador and chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, who recorded a popular legend among the natives concerning giants that landed on the peninsula of Santa Elena, which was once part of the province of Peru, but now belongs to Ecuador. The legends tell of a tribe of evil giants that came from the sea riding on large boats made of reeds. The natives say that the giants were so large that a man of common stature measured only up to their knees.
The natives relate what they have heard from their fathers, that from over the sea in large boats made of reeds came men so large that a man of common body proportions measured only up to their knees, though he be of good stature, and that their members conformed to the greatness of their bodies, which were so deformed that it was a monstrous thing to see the heads accordingly large, and their hair which reached down to their backs. They point out that their eyes were as big as small plates. They affirm that they did not have beards, and that some of them came dressed in animal skins, while others were in their natural clothes, and that they did not bring women with them.
When the giants landed at Santa Elena, they built massive houses and dug extremely deep wells. The infamous houses of the giants were still standing, and their wells were still in use during and after the conquest of Peru. They're referenced numerous times in the historical records from that era.
At this peninsula, even though it is beach, the natives that come down from Panama drink water and refresh themselves. There were once giants here, and the natives say that they don't know from whence they came. Their houses were 3 leagues below the anchorage, made of 2 gables with very large beams. I saw some of these beams being brought on rafts to be incorporated into a building that was being constructed by the viceroy of those Indians, named Alonso de Vera. I also saw the large tooth of a giant, which weighed more than 10 ounces. The Indians say, according to the tradition of their ancestors, that the giants did not have women, and not willing to wait for what was natural, were given over to sodomy, for which God punished them by sending fire from heaven, and so destroyed all of them. This kind of notorious vice has no other remedy.
Once their houses and wells were completed, the giants began ransacking the countryside and devouring all the sustenance of the land. It was said that a single giant consumed more food than 50 of the natives combined.
These large men, or giants, having established their settlement and constructed these wells or cisterns from which they drank, they destroyed and devoured all of the sustenance they could find in that region, so much so that they say that one of them consumed more food than 50 of the natives of that land. And as the food that they found was not enough to sustain them, they killed a lot of fish in the sea with their nets and riggings, which according to reason they had.
The natives hated the giants, not only because they were consuming all of their food, but also because they were taking and killing their women by attempting to have intercourse with them. Basically, the giants were raping their women to death.
The natives lived in great loathing of them because they killed their women by using them. and for other reasons. And the Indians were not strong enough to kill these new people who had come to occupy their land and lord over them, even though they had great meetings to discuss them, but they did not dare attack them.
Since the giants didn't bring any women with them, and they were too large for the native women, the giants began to sodomize each other and to practice their sin out in the open without shame or fear of divine judgment. One day, while they were engaged in the act, a bright angel appeared in the sky above them, wielding a shining sword. The angel threw down fire and lightning on the giants until they were completely consumed in the flames, and only their charred bones remained as a testimony to their divine judgment.
And all of the natives affirm that the Lord our God, not being served to overlook such an evil sin, sent them a judgment according to the ugliness of the sin. And thus they say that as they were together enveloped in their damned sodomy, fire came down from a dreadful sky with great noise, in the midst of which came forth a resplendent angel with a sharp shining sword, with which in one single blow he killed all of them, and the fire consumed them, so that all that was left were the bones and skulls, which God wanted to remain unconsumed by the fire, as a memorial of their judgment. This is what they say about the giants, which we believe happened, because in this region they have found, and find still, massive bones. And I have heard of Spaniards that have seen fragments of teeth that they swore that if they were whole would weigh more than a butcher's half-pound. And also that they have seen another fragment of shin bone, that it is amazing to account how large it was, which testifies that all of this truly happened. And even besides all of this, one can still see where their village was, and the wells and cisterns which they made.
Interestingly enough, this same story concerning the sodomite giants that were destroyed in the judgment of God was so popular among the natives of Peru that many of the chroniclers make mention of it in their writings. In fact, even Francisco Pizarro and his men saw the bones with their own eyes while passing through Santa Elena.
Francisco Pizarro and his company arrived at Puerto Viejo into Santa Elena, where they saw a large quantity of bones of giants that, according to their proportion, were 20 palms tall. The Indians had a tradition concerning these giants that they were people from before the flood, because giants of such huge size were never known to exist again. Others say that they were sodomites, and that in one day fire fell from heaven and consumed them all. Speaking of the giants that existed in ancient times, in what is called today the peninsula of Santa Elena, Provincial Father Torquemada says these words in his book, Indian Monarchy. Speaking of the giants that existed before or after the flood in these native lands, and it's true that after the flood they existed in the New World, and it is said that it was well known that there were giants that came from other parts, whose greatly deformed bones are still found to this day near Manta in Puerto Viejo. And according to their proportion, they had to be men in stature, more than 3 times the size of the Indians of today. They say that these giants came from over the sea, and that they made war with those on the land, and that they raised mighty edifices, some of the stones of which still stand today in testimony of their greatness. They also say that these giants, being terrible sinners, practicing incest and sodomy, were burned and consumed with fire that came from heaven. This is the witness of Father Torquemada, and Teodoro de Bray also references the same in his book entitled De Natura Nobi Orbis. Added to this are the known traditions that all of these giants, whose bones are still seen to this day in that beautiful place, died in flames, because a young handsome man, these Indians did not know of the existence of angels, threw lightning down upon them and incinerated all of them, leaving only their bones, so that they would remain as a dreadful witness.
The legend of the giants of Santa Elena is well known and has been sanctimoniously dismissed as pure myth by historians who claim that the giant bones found by the conquistadors and chroniclers in Peru were nothing more than the bones of mastodons and giant sloths. This argument might be persuasive if mastodons and giant sloths could build houses and dig wells. But the real problem for historians is that the legend of the giants at Santa Elena was scientifically proven to be true in 1543 by Captain Juan Olmos, who dug up not only the bones but also the heads of the giants.
And with all of this, full credit has never been given to what the Indians said about these giants, until, being the lieutenant governor at Puerto Viejo in the year 1543, Captain Juan Olmos, native of Trujillo, hearing all of these things, conducted an excavation in that valley, where he found such gigantic ribs and other bones, that if the heads had not been found with them, it would not have been believable that they were human beings. And thus, by his own investigation, and seeing the signs of the lightning that punished them, he confirmed what the Indians had said to be true. And he sent throughout the diverse regions of Peru some of the teeth that they found there, each one which measured 3 fingers in width and 4 in length.
The Incas, the conquistadors, and the chroniclers all agree that there were giants in the land. On more than one occasion, the conquistadors found gigantic human skulls, so large when they stuck their swords into the eye socket of the skull, the tip of the blade barely touched the back of the cranial cavity.
One thing that cannot be denied, as much as for the tradition of the Indians themselves, as for the signs and relics that are still present, is that there were once giants in this land. How they came to this land and from where, and how long they lived in it, is uncertain. The first Spanish conquistadors of this kingdom found in the peninsula and port of Santa Elena, Diocese of Quito, human bones of massive size that they knew belonged to giants, and among them some shin bones more than 3 feet long. Many other bones of the same proportion have been discovered afterwards in other parts of that same province, and in the province of Trujillo. Also bones of equal size have been seen further inland, as in the province of Tucumán and Tarija. In the latter of these, a whole body was discovered beneath the ravine, or bank of a river, that the water, having eroded the bank, had unearthed. It was so massive that its grave occupied a very large space, and its skull was so abnormally gigantic that some of the Spaniards, thrusting their swords through its eye socket, could barely reach the back side of its head with the points of their blades. In the province of Santa Cruz in the Sierra, the governor was an honest Christian gentleman named Don Lorenzo Suarez de Figueroa that populated the city of San Lorenzo, capital of that province. And he found something during the conquest of Tucumán. This gentleman used to say that while marching in that conquest, they discovered an ossuary that appeared to contain more than 100 human bodies, and all of the bones belonged to enormous giants. And he himself thrust his sword through one of the skulls, and the whole blade passed into the cavity. From that same region of Tucumán and Tarija, they brought back to the Villa de Potasi some years ago a great quantity of bones of giants. All of them were in pieces, so that there was not one entire bone except for some teeth. But their abnormally gigantic size demonstrated that they were from massive bodies. Each tooth was no smaller than a fist. One of them was weighed at 11 ounces, which made the man who weighed it a believer. I am not sure if the bones that were shown to me in the city of Lima were the same ones, but among them was a tooth of the same size of those that I have mentioned. And it is true that even though it had the form of a perfect tooth, it was so old that it seemed more like a rock than a bone.
This is a modern adaptation of a 16th century shell-hilt rapier sword, something like what some of the conquistadors might have used. The blades on most of these rapiers were between 36 and 43 inches. This sword has a 41-inch blade. This gives you an idea of just how large the skulls that the conquistadors were finding really were. We're definitely dealing with giants well over 15 feet tall. In fact, some reports claim that the bodies of giants 6 times the size of normal men were discovered in Peru.
And also to the houses of the Juarez, which were the first inhabitants of that land, that they say were giants. And it is true that in some places they were, because deformed bones have been found of incredible size, that those who have not seen them nor touched them with their hands would not believe, because they demonstrate the proportion of the bones, that they were 6 times bigger than men of our day. And in their land they bring their sick, and for evil purposes relating to love. They invoke the Huari, whom they say is the god of forces, when they go out to make their farms or houses, so that he lends them his strength.
After the conquest of the Incas, the Catholic Church sent priests from the various orders to convert the pagan natives to Christianity. The Kingdom of Spain also sent official inspectors to aid the efforts of the priests and to inspect the affairs of their newly conquered province. Together, the priests and the inspectors worked to exterminate idolatry in Peru. They discovered that the natives worshipped the giants, and so the corpses and bones of the giants were burned wherever they were found. Official records were made concerning these activities, including the discovery of 3 giants with elongated heads enshrined in a cave.
They took us to the other side of the village, about a quarter of a league, where a very large cave was, and in it many dead Gentiles, and among them were 3 bodies of giants with deformed heads, dressed in kumbi, but rotted with time. These are the progenitors of all this people, whom they worshipped and revered. There were many traces of sacrifices. They burned the bodies in the village. They worshipped high mountains, elevated mounds, and the houses of the Juarez, who were the first inhabitants, the sons of each land, that they say were giants.
People always ask me, if giants existed, then where are all the bones? The answer is simple. They've all been incinerated or confiscated by the Vatican or by other institutions such as the Smithsonian. In fact, many of the bones found throughout Peru, Bolivia and Ecuador in the 16th and 17th centuries were sent to Lima and ended up in the hands of the Inquisition. The conquistadors and chroniclers were not just discovering the bones of giants in the province of Peru, but all over the Americas, to such an extent that they wondered if all the giants were of the same race.
Not only in Peru are there traces of giants, but also in New Spain, and this demonstrates that they inhabited all of America. In this year of 1550, I heard it said, being in the city of Kings, and in the presence of the illustrious Don Antonio de Mendoza, Viceroy and Governor of New Spain, where certain bones were found of men as large as these giants, and even bigger. And besides this, I have also heard before in the Agora, that in an ancient grave in the city of Mexico, or in another part of that kingdom, certain bones of giants were found. These giants seem to have been everywhere, since so many have seen them and affirmed their existence, and they might even all be of the same race.
The Inca believed that the giants that existed before the Great Flood were of a much more colossal size than those that existed after the flood. The smaller post-flood giants could still be found in the land and even fought in some of their battles.
And in the aforementioned battle, they say that 2 giants were killed, whose bones are presently in Chacaro, set upon pedestals.